All right, well, let me start.
I can't see it.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is the second presentation of Brenda Crowther of the Great Books course last trimester on Clarissa Pinkola Estés' book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves. Over to you, Brenda.
Thank you, Yogi. Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to the second part of Women Who Run with the Wolves. And this time, we're going to look at what the obstacle might be to finding that wildness within. So last time I spoke more positively about what the wild woman was. Now we come to obstacles. And I want to speak about how important our attitude to the obstacle is and how it could be equated with initiation. So also I spoke last time about my relationship to the book and how it influenced, contributed to my choice to train as a Jungian analyst. It's a book of the imagination and it's for working with in daily life.
Could you just have them I've got problems here. Just have them garden.
Also, that Clarissa Pinkola Estés is a cantadora, a keeper of the old stories. And these myriad tales pass to us in a really soulful vitality. So this fires us to relish being a woman in a society that has a dominant masculine influence that leaks into all ourselves, both male and female. So each time a woman tells a story or listens to one, it conserves and expresses her creative instinct, for the vibration of the voice enters the soul easily. This is what is marvelous about telling stories rather than reading them. The told story has a rhythm, and it's this rhythmic aspect that we absorb. And for this reason, as I explained in the first talk, why, first of all, when I tried to remember one of the poems that I'd learnt at school, it was always the rhythm that came back, and then the words followed. So the Women Who Run with the Wolves is based on the curative, therapeutic, and creative aspect of storytelling. And it's in this way that all cantadoras work to keep the wood burning on a cosmic fire. Not only for children and adults who benefit immensely, but also for putting energy into the world that we inhabit. And for this reason, women do their personal creative work individually, rather than work en masse. But to draw together in winter when the nights are dark and the lamps are lit, and to share stories and a few delicacies, to water the palate, and it's a fine way to ponder the rhythm of the soul and to listen to ageless wisdoms within the story. So in some teachings, most notably the Sufis, wisdom teachings are presented through story. They both entertain and dispense spiritual nourishment. The Sufi is inspired to tell a tale that he or she feels will respond to the atmosphere or perhaps the needs of the people listening, and even deeper, that it will speak to each person differently. So it is often the case that the tale is lodged there internally. It's done its work, but the message hasn't bubbled up to the surface yet. So it remains inside as a teacher. And many years later, we cross the path of what we've already created within. So such is the power of story. And this is the way that Clarissa Pinkola Estés uses it. So tales, they enrich our insight, show us penetrating reflections of ourselves, how we live, and sometimes they show us our particular and special path, our truth. And they are rarely generalized. That is, they are not paradigms, but reach deep into the heart. So Clarissa Pinkola Estés presents the first obstacle through story, and it's a very supernatural obstacle. And again, as I said earlier, read obstacle as initiation. In this way, we find the wolf within through the fairy tale. It helps in our search for the courageous and wild heart. And if you get the feeling of a furry skin that tickles you, or the weight of your luxurious swishing tail, then you may be reminded through the imagination of your spiritual origin. In fact, just now, focus on where your tail might be. It's a very potent little exercise. So the first obstacle or initiation is the internal predator who keeps this deep knowing from us. And yet, out of its blackness, tempts us into the secret knowledge of it. So it's a great paradox. Through the medium of the fairy tale Bluebeard, we learn about that powerful internal predator. Bluebeard is a French folktale from a collection by Charles Perrault, first published in France in 1697. His fairy tale collection came out about 100 years before the Brothers Grimm in Germany. But of course, as archetypes, they're absolutely ageless. So now, if you would like to stop swishing your tails, be at rest, and hear the story before we discuss its meaning. This is Pinkola Estés' favorite version of the story, so I'm telling this one too. So, the story of Bluebeard. There is a hunk of beard that is kept at the convent of the White Nuns in the far mountains. How it came there, no one knows. Some say it was the nuns who buried what was left of his body, for no one else would touch it. Why the nuns should keep such a relic is absolutely unknown, but it's true. My friend's friend has seen it with her own eyes. She says the beard is blue, indigo-coloured to be exact, as blue as the dark ice of the lake, as blue as the shadow of a hole at night. This beard was once worn by one who was a failed magician, a giant man with an eye for women, a man known by the name of Bluebeard. It was said that he courted 3 sisters, all at the same time, of course, but they were frightened of his beard and its odd blue cast, and so they hid when he called. In an effort to convince them of his geniality, he invited them on an outing in the forest. He arrived leading horses arrayed in bells and crimson ribbons. He set the sisters and the mother on the horses, and off they cantered into the forest. There they had a most wonderful day, riding through the forest, their dogs beside and in front, and later they even stopped beneath a magnificent giant tree, and Bluebeard regaled them with stories and fed them dainty treats. The sisters began to think, well, perhaps this man Bluebeard, perhaps he's not so bad after all. They returned home, all of a chatter about their interesting day, And did they not have a good time? Yet the two older sisters, they were suspicious, and their fears returned, and they vowed never to see Bluebeard again. But the younger sister thought, if a man could be that charming, then perhaps he was not so bad. The more she talked to herself, the less awful he seemed. And indeed, the less blue his beard. So when Bluebeard asked for her hand in marriage, she accepted. She had given his proposal great thought and felt she was to marry a very elegant man. Marry they did, and afterwards rode off to his castle in the woods. One day he came to her and said, "I must go away for a while. Invite your family here if you like. You may ride in the woods, charge the cooks to set a feast. You may do anything you like, anything your heart desires. In fact, here is my ring of keys. You may open any and every door to the storerooms, the money rooms, any door in the castle. But this little tiny key, the one with the scroll work on top, do not use." His bride replied, "Yes, I will do as you ask. It all sounds very fine. So go, dear husband, and do not have a worry, and come back soon." And so off he rode, and she stayed. Her sisters came to visit, and they were, as all souls are, very curious. What did the master mean when he said these things? For the young wife had gaily told them everything. He said, "We may do anything we desire and enter any room we wish, except one. I don't know which one it is. I just have a key, and I don't know which door it fits." The sisters decided to make a game of finding which key fit which door. The castle was 3 stories high, with 100 doors in each wing. And there were many keys on the ring, and they crept from door to door, having an immensely good time throwing open each door. Behind one door were the kitchen stores, another the money stores. All manner of holdings and wonderful things were behind the doors, and everything seemed more marvelous all the time. At last, having seen all these marvels, they came finally to the cellar, and at the end of the corridor, a blank wall. They puzzled over the last key with the little scroll work on top. "Maybe this key doesn't fit anything at all," one sister said. But suddenly they heard an odd sound, a sort of "rrr." They peeked around the corner, and lo and behold, there was a small door just closing. When they tried to open it again, it was firmly locked. One cried, "Sister, sister, bring your key. Surely this is the door for that mysterious little key." Without a thought, one of the sisters put the key in the door and turned it. The lock scolded, the door swung open, but it was dark inside and they could not see. "Sister, sister, bring a candle," said one. So a candle was lit and held into the room, and all 3 women screamed at once, for the room was a mire of blood, and the blackened bones of corpses were flung about, and skulls were stacked in corners in pyramids like apples. They slammed the door shut, shook the key out of the lock, and leaned one against one another, gasping, their breaths heaving. My God, they said. The wife looked down at the key and saw that it was stained with blood. Horrified, she used the skirt of her gown to wipe it clean, but the blood prevailed. "Oh no," she cried. Each sister took the tiny key in her hands and tried to make it as it once was, but the blood remained. The wife hid the tiny key in her pocket and ran to the cook's kitchen. When she arrived, her white dress was stained red from pocket to hem, for the key was slowly, slowly weeping drops of dark red blood. She ordered the cook, "Quick, give me some horsehair." She scoured the key with this, but it would not stop bleeding. She pressed ashes into it and scrubbed it some more. She held it against heat to sear it. She laid cobwebs to staunch the blood. Nothing worked. The wife felt that she was in a bad dream, and really she was not wrong. She hid the key in the wardrobe, where we must guess it continued to weep blood. Her husband came home the next morning and asked his wife how things were when he was away. She answered, "It was fine, sir." He answered, "Then you'd best return the keys." With a quick glance, he saw the little key was missing. His wife said that she'd lost it in the forest riding. But Bluebeard seized her by the hair and said, "You've been in the room, haven't you?" He dragged her screaming towards the room, opened the door with his fiery eyes to see the skeletons of his previous wives. He said, "And now it's your turn." The wife managed to get 15 minutes out of him to say her prayers and prepare for her death. She dashed up the stairs to the castle ramparts and three times asked her sisters if their brothers were coming. On the third asking, the brothers appeared and entered the castle on their horses. Just at that moment, Bluebeard strode down the hall, and all the mortar between the stones just burst out, and the stones followed him. Just as he was about to cut her throat, the brothers galloped towards him. They pushed Bluebeard onto the ramparts, and with their swords cutting and slashing, they killed him at last and left his blood and gristle for the buzzards. So this is an image of the internal predator, and there are many, many more. To work with Bluebeard, we have to first of all see that he is a psychic factor, and that we have to go into the darkness and the mystery of this. Dark forces live in dark places in the psyche, and Bluebeard's room is such a place. It is the symbol of a dark complex, hidden away, until, of course, we find the key. The woman has to make sure that she's not going to be killed in any way, psychically, first of all, for there are many, many women psychically killed, but still walking around as alive, or even physically during this meaningful journey. For sometimes the predator within magnetizes the predator without. This is the drama of a woman's life towards wildness and truth. Pinkola Estés calls Bluebeard a deep reclusive complex. The it or the he wants to be the superior factor in a woman's life, to dominate her. It might sound a good solution to aim for the light, but the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And then it becomes more distant from our consciousness. If this happens, then the psychological tension between our light consciousness and our shadow becomes too tight, like a tight rubber band. So we must tread a delicate and discriminating path. The dark man, the predator, or as he's sometimes called, the animus, is often skillful and appears in many forms, for as the knowledge of him progresses, so he shifts his shape. The power of reflection for the woman is therefore a real must-have. The search to winkle out or to transform this predator is really a journey through the unconscious that finds its reflection in everyday life. I'm going to read you a few dreams, they're actual dreams, which show some of the stages in the psychological process of a woman with this dark predator or Bluebeard problem. For I feel it's always good to listen to real experiences. They're just a few dreams. They're spaced out over quite a few years, for she had many dreams of confronting this dark entity. I would say she probably wrote down 1,000 dreams. They show how the unconscious helps us by showing us the real situation. This is the first dream, and it's told in the first person as if the dreamer is telling it. On the opposite side of the street is a house, which unusually is open to the public. I seize my chance and go in. There is an antechamber on the right with large musty pictures. They are paintings of stiff patriarchs, men that I dislike intensely. Through to the left is an exceptionally high-ceilinged room hung with pictures in gilt frames of similar figures, patriarchs. As soon as I step into the room, there is an incredibly strong electrical charge. It's enormously powerful and frightening. The experience pervades everything in me, and I have to leave, and I go into the smaller room to look at a couple of pictures there. The electric charge continues, and I can't go on. I wake up and feel absolutely done in. So this is the initiatory dream that opens the dreamer's eyes to the problem. She meets the patriarchal masculine power as a group of men with dark, sexual, predatory power. Now, these faded oil paintings also carry an ancestral aspect because she comes from a line of Eastern European patriarchal men, a quality that she detests and which goes against all the values she holds as a woman. But she can't get away from these unconscious predators. They're trapped within. It's even difficult to meet them because the electric charge eliminates any sense of dialogue. The charge pushes her out of the room. It's also quite sexual. This is the stuff of the Bluebeard within, and the dominating masculine spirit overruling the femininity. That's her hidden wild woman, but it's there. She has entered her own version of the hidden room of Bluebeard, and like the three sisters, is frightened by it. The dream ego, the dream consciousness, that is the part of our psyche that actually remembers the dream, can't form a relationship with this power, can't challenge it, and so she has to leave the scene. It's destructive, but she knows what's there. Pinkola Estés says of this, "But what shall we do with these inner beings who are quite mad and those who carry out destruction without thought. Even these must be given a place, though one in which they can be contained. One entity in particular, the most deceitful and most powerful fugitive in the psyche, requires our immediate consciousness and containment, and that one is the internal predator. So you see, our dreamer feels absolutely done in from the shock, and she's a bit like the sisters when they discover the contents of the locked chamber. She can't go on any longer. Pinkola Estés says of this dark man aspect that there is, of course, human suffering traced to negligence, but there is an innate aspect of the psyche, a derisive and murderous antagonist that is born within us. And even with the best parental nurture, the murderous sole assignment is to attempt to turn all crossroads into closed roads and witness the end of the corridor and the blank wall in the story of Bluebeard. One can't go further. Afterwards, she begins to understand this power, the dreamer that is, and makes a stance against its power by asserting her feminine qualities. So, this dark predator finds another way to attack her, for he is devious and wants to retain his power. And this is another shorter dream. I am being welcomed into a secret, closed fraternity with someone who is in charge and is ferociously self-armed. I am in a small bedroom, like mine at home, and I have a particular gift which enables me to become invisible. Other women have come under stern judgment because they haven't been able to become invisible like me. So in the Bluebeard story, there is a secret room with a tiny key. That is the hidden psychological dark man complex locked away that has the potential to suck the lifeblood out of a woman once she finds out the secret. In this dream, we see it as a little bedroom, the most private space, where she is enclosed and penetrated by the fraternity. And you see again, it's a group of men. She experiences the dark predator as a group of men. And we can say that she's living far too close to that dark, reclusive complex. And it's not too contained in a separate part of her psyche, just as Pinkola Estés describes that it needs to be. Now, as this woman has an interest in the intuitive and the magical, she naturally begins to feel special, especially as the other women in the dream can't be invisible like her. So she feels complimented for being magical and thus not giving any trouble. She related this narrative also in a dreamy tone of voice, as though the gift of invisibility is something desirable. But it isn't. She's just being kept quiet and passive by the dark fraternity, though the important thing is that she does avoid the stern judgment of the fraternity and lives to see another day. But here we come to another trap, which is passivity. We often find the dark man problem in a woman who from the outside appears very feminine, trying to live in the light and conforming to that passive soft way of being that is stereotypically only described as feminine. When the dreamer meets the fraternity, they are all in league with each other to keep her prisoner by invading her private bedroom and keeping her there willingly through the compliment. Like the patriarchal paintings in the first dream, the predator is represented by this group. Now, the dreamer had already done considerable work chasing this shapeshifter. But you'll see that the dark man is complimenting her on the magical quality of her being to keep her dominated. And in truth, in real life, she has a wonderful magical quality, and she's interested in the intuitive. So the fraternity get at her through her own truth. How subtle and devious is that? Then the break comes, for she contacts the instinctive feminine that gives her the energy to confront all these different shapes. And this is the next dream. I'm standing by the window, waiting for my grandmother to get ready. I look through the curtains and see the most dramatic. I call everyone to look. There in the sea are an amazing number of brown bears. To the right, a white bear stands on its hind legs. It joins with the others and frolics in the sea. They lie in the surf, enjoying it, filled with incredible life. So we see the dreamer waits for her grandmother, that is, the great mother, the great symbol of feminine energy. Now, the bears are the instinctive energies and images of the great mother. And because of this, she feels injected with new life. So it is really the instinctive power of the feminine, which is really that wildness, that has the power to resist the domination of the dark man. So we see that what overcomes it in the end is not confronting this dark thing directly, but developing the feminine power that brings the masculine power over to the other side. That is, the dark energy of the predator, which is, after all, energy, transforms. And here in the next dream, we see this transformation. This is the dream. I have erotic sex with a man who I get on top of, and I give and receive real pleasure. There is the sense of the color pink swirling around us. Now, I'd like to ask if Richard has the PowerPoint yet, but I think he's switched on.
I have the PowerPoint. It's the one we had before from the last session. Is that the same one?
No, it should be different pictures.
I'm
check.
sorry. I don't have it then.
Ah, I'm sorry, it's not got there.
You can't. Can you show?
Sorry?
Oh, I was just wondering, can you show it from your end with the share screen, do you think?
No, we'll leave it and I'll describe it.
Okay, sorry about that.
Don't worry. So this dream is what we call an inner marriage. That is, the feminine spirit is really on top of the situation, and the masculine power has transformed, and instead of dominating, supports her from beneath. He's gone over to her side, so that in the lovemaking she finds real pleasure. So this is an initiation into herself. And this, of course, is the transformed Bluebeard energy. Now, the pictures I wanted to show you, I'll just describe them because it may be helpful. What we're seeing in this dream is what's called the inner marriage or the conjunctio. And it's two energies of psychic energy which come together, which is the meaning of the sexual encounter. Now, the color pink that she's surrounded by is, of course, a mixture of red and white. In alchemy, the red king and the White Queen make love in the waters of the unconscious, which is to say that two energies come together and there is an inner marriage. So in the case of Bluebeard, the energy that was lost to this woman in the psyche and locked away is now united with her, enlarging her consciousness, and she receives a transformation. I'll put another one in of a Tibetan tanka, which shows a dark god on a throne being embraced by a white woman. It's very beautiful, so it's a pity. But this, of course, is showing the meeting of the opposites. And then the other one is also a Tibetan tanka, which shows the same thing, but surrounding this central activity of the sex are everyday things. Children playing, all sorts of things. So this tells us that the experience is intrapsychic. We're not looking at flesh and blood making love, an intrapsychic process where energy is united. We call that alchemy. So you see, you don't really have to kill the psychic predator. His energy has to be transformed. So all sexual dreams, and I feel without exception from my own experience, show the coming together of opposing energies in a symbolic form. So the work of the transformation of the predatory energy, though deep and necessary, needs complementing by humor. And Pinkola Estés has many aspects of this in her book. For we cannot always be in such dark work. But the sexual aspect is also important because it is so very instinctive. Now, there's a whole series of erotic stories. And in this last dream, we saw a profound moment of this happen. Now, this aspect has been much repressed in women who are often expected to be ladies. And in many societies of our world, women are not allowed sexuality. They're not allowed to nourish the wild wolf within. They are baby bearers and keepers of the hearth, above all. Now, that is beautiful too, to bear children and keep the hearth. But it needs to be more rounded and to let the wild woman in. And so I recommend the chapter entitled Heat, Retrieving Sacred Sexuality. The first section is called The Dirty Goddesses. And there's some lovely, juicy stories here. And of these, Pinkola Estés says, there is an aspect of woman's sexuality that in ancient times was called the sacred obscene. Not in the way we use the obscene today, but meaning sexually wise in a witty sort of way. There were once goddess cults that were in some part devoted to irreverent female sexuality. The rites were not derogatory, but were concerned with portraying parts of the unconscious that remain, even today, mysterious and largely uncharted, regardless of our society, which is supposedly open about sex, but only this much. The very idea of sexuality is sacred. And more specifically, obscenity as an aspect of sacred sexuality is vital to the wildish nature. There were goddesses of obscenity in the ancient women's cultures, so called for their innocent yet wily lewdness, real lewdness. Then Pinkola Estés describes how she began telling dirty goddess stories some years ago, and how all the women smiled and laughed about the sexual exploits of the goddesses. Perhaps the most famous one, which you may have heard of, is Baubo, the ancient Greek goddess of obscenity, whose other name is Ayambe. She is no doubt a borrowing from more primal cultures when things were more open on the instincts, and is incorporated into the Greek pantheon of the great Olympus. She appears in the story of Demeter, the earth goddess, and her daughter Persephone, who was picking flowers in the meadow one day when a crack appeared in the earth. And out of this crack came Hades, the god of the underworld, in his black chariot, and he himself as black as night. He stole Persephone to be his bride in the underworld. From that point, Demeter began to be crazed and had a terrible suffering as she searched for her lost daughter, for she never saw Hades abduct her. She cursed all the fields and trees, and Demeter groaned across the earth. She mourned for her loss. Her clothes were torn, she was covered in mud. And one day, with an aching body, she leaned her cheek against the cool stone of a well. And this is how Pinkola Estés describes it. And then this woman danced up to Demeter, wiggling her hips, in a way suggesting sexual intercourse, and shaking her breasts in a little dance. And when Demeter saw her, she could not help but smile, just a little. The dancing female was very magical indeed, for she had no head whatsoever. And her nipples were her eyes, and her vulva was her mouth. It was through this lovely mouth that she began to regale Demeter with some nice, juicy jokes. Demeter began to smile, and then chuckled, and then gave a full belly laugh. And together the two women laughed. The little belly goddess, Baubo, and the powerful Mother Earth goddess, the great goddess Demeter, she howled with laughter. So her depression was lifted. So this gives us energy to continue our work too. This is, in a way, a profoundly deep and serious form of laughter, and surely enlightens our work with the dark predator, for we must have light, we must have humor. Pinkola Estés thinks the following story is one that Baubo might have told. She describes hearing it some years ago from an old trailer park manager called Old Red. He claimed to have native blood. She was traveling around, collecting and researching stories, and pulling up with her trailer in his park, and she said to him, "So do you know any stories about these parts?" Well, as soon as he heard the word parts, he started to chuckle. And with a sly look at his wife and somewhat of a rubbery smile, he said, "I'm going to tell her about Coyote Dick." "Red," said the wife, "don't tell her that story. You mustn't tell her that story. I'm going to tell her about Coyote Dick right now." Pinkola Estés says, "This is what Old Red told me. He said he heard this story from a Navajo, who heard it from a Mexican, who heard it from a Hopi. So let's hear the story of Coyote Dick. Once upon a time, there was Coyote Dick. And he was both the smartest and the dumbest creature you could ever hope to mate. He was always hungry for something and always playing tricks on people to get what he wanted. Any other time, he was sleeping. Well, one day when Coyote Dick was sleeping, his penis got really bored and decided to leave Coyote and have an adventure on its own. So the penis detached itself from Coyote Dick and ran down the road. Actually, it hopped. It hopped because it had just one leg, that's all. So it hopped and hopped and hopped, and it was having a real good time. It hopped off the road and ran into the woods, where, oh no, it hopped right into a grove of stinging nettles. Ouch, it cried. Oh, 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 it screeched, help, help, stinging. The sound of all this crying woke Coyote Dick. And when he reached down to start his heart with the accustomed crank, all was gone. Coyote Dick ran down the road, holding himself between the legs, and finally came upon his penis in the worst trouble you can imagine. Gently, Coyote Dick lifted his adventurous penis out of the nettles, patted him, soothed him down a bit, and put him back where he belonged. Old Red roared with laughter, had a coughing fit with his eyes bulging, tears rolling down his face. But his wife wasn't so happy, and she said, "You've not finished the story. That's not the right ending. You forgot to tell the real ending of the story, you old tank of gas." Then his wife, she got a sparkle in her eyes. She said, "The ending of the story is the moral." And at that moment, the goddess Baubo took hold of her, for she began to giggle and to guffaw, and finally to belly laugh, and tears rolled down her cheeks. And this is what she said between all the gasps. The moral is that those nettles, even once Coyote Dick got out of them, made his cock itch like crazy forever after. And that's why men are always sliding up to women and wanting to rub up against them with that "I'm so itchy" look in their eyes. You know, that universal cock has been itching ever since the first time it ever ran away. Pinkola Estés says, "Well, we sat there in her kitchen, shrieking and pounding the table till we had practically lost all muscle control." This is truly the kind of story I think Baubo, that goddess of obscenity, told. There is something about a sexual laugh that is different from a laugh about more tame things. A sexual laugh seems to reach both far and wide into the psyche, shaking all manner of things loose, playing upon our bones, and making a delightful feeling course through the body. It's a form of wildish pleasure that belongs to every woman's psychic repertoire. And here we come to the bones, for we all begin as bones, around which our flesh is wrapped. Like the story of La Loba that I told in our last meeting. So this Baubo obscene story and its belly laughter remind me of so-called more immature times, when jokes like that were told amongst us girls in schoolyards and without the boys present. just as old Red, when his wife challenged him to say the proper ending, disappeared. Now, I am supposed to have grown out of such things, and when I did that, I failed to understand their worth. Did I have to go through a civilizing process before I could unearth the archetypal meaning of sexuality expressed by the magical form of Balbo? Or did I let her go when Bluebeard transformed? Only to begin the search to retrieve her once more, to appreciate the deep and sacred quality of what Balbo laughed and spoke about. I remember an Indian dancing teacher saying that the best dancers were always old women because their body knows the moves from a great depth of experience rather than a nubile body. In the search for the wild woman within us, we see that although the predator is living within us at times, that our laughter can loosen the bones, loosen the tensions, and make him seem at times ridiculous. Working with opposites like this, we are enabled to treat every obstacle in life as an initiation. And that means a new stage of our lives. Also, no dominator likes to feel ridiculed and put in his place. And he might just change his tune and use his energy to help us and enjoy that process more than domination. Just like the woman's dream of making love. One woman who does this work automatically helps all the others. For the unconscious is common to us all. The archetypal world that we often speak of, it's in the unconscious which is not personal. So when one woman works with the archetypal deep work, naturally it spreads into the space which lies underneath every woman. So we are all touched, and maybe we don't know it. Just like the story that lives within us as a teacher. And maybe all the time we receive these archetypal waves that change us. And suddenly one day we wake up and we feel a change and we think, well, where did that come from? Someone has been working somewhere. We are not alone. In dreams, in stories, our life is unfolded. And we touch these wild regions and bring them to birth. And it's really in that way that we run with the wolves. It's not so personal as we might think, but it is personally experienced. So there's a chance for us all to personally experience through our individual nature this great expanse of the archetypal world which teaches us things without knowing. And maybe that's what teaches us how to run with the wolves. So, having looked at some of the stories, in which I include dreams, because dreams are psychic stories, that we get a taste of the book. So let's hear the last words from Clarissa Pinkola Estés. She says, I hope you will go out and let stories, that is life, happen to you. And that you will work with these stories from your life, and not someone else's life. Water them with your blood and tears and your laughter till they bloom, till you yourself burst into bloom. That's the work, and it's the only work. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. You are a great storyteller. I love listening to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I read Coyote's Dick story, but it's much better in your presentation, for sure. Right. Before we turn to our audience, actually, I'd like to ask your commenting on a following paragraph, which is on page 270 in the Homecoming, Returning to Oneself. And this is how it goes. I really feel that it's, this is almost like a core message of the book, but I leave it to you for expanding on it. In the beginning of one's life, the ego is curious about the soul world, but more often it is concerned with fulfilling its own hungers. The ego is initially born into us as potential and is shaped, developed, and filled up with ideas, values, and duties by the world around us, our parents, our teachers, our culture. And this is as it should be, for it becomes our escort, our armor, and our scout in the outer world. However, if the wildish nature is not allowed to emanate upward through the ego, giving it color, juice, and instinctive responsiveness, then although the culture may approve of what has been fashioned in this ego, the soul does not, cannot, will not approve such incompleteness of its work.
Yes.
Would you mind to expand a little bit more on it?
Well, this is, of course, the eternal conflict. And the ego, of course, is the consciousness of the person. And this has to develop. For instance, we can't really meet the dark predator unless we have quite a good, strong consciousness.
Mm.
And consciousness is represented by the ego. So you have to distinguish now the ego as consciousness from the meaning that it's often given, egocentrism, which is a form of selfishness. So we speak here of the ego as the conscious aspect of our personality. Mm. So this develops and the soul goes underground into the unconscious. And this is why children have such a terrible conflict, because they want to express this, but they learn what we call civilized behavior. Mm. Now, this develops the ego, the consciousness, but sometimes the soul is left behind. Mm. Unless the parents tend to the soul or there's some influence. Mm. So then you have the conflict of how do you find your own soul when it's got so deeply pushed away? So then the ego changes its function. It becomes, instead of just finding your way through life and becoming civilized, becoming conditioned essentially, then it turns and becomes a tool of discrimination. Mm. And with that, you're able to follow the soul and the dreams and reflect on them. And you'll notice that at the beginning, I said the thing that is greatly needed is reflection, which isn't a passive process. It's a very active state of mind. So all the time, we're trying to handle this balance between what the soul wants and what we want. What we want in the form of ambition or house or whatever, where we want to live, which country. This is all the ego conscious stuff. And we have to do these choices. We are human. We're not floating bits of soul, we're embodied. So the ego is very much to do with our embodiment. Mm. And then, of course, there's the development of the very sensitive aspect of the soul. And this is a very tender work. And this is, in fact, why we get people like the goddess Baobab, because she lessens the intensity and the tension and gives us a moment of seeing what the instinct wants, because we're composed of many more things than we think we are. Mm. We have many blessings which we don't realize because they're coming in invisibly through the unconscious they can't grasp them.
Thank
Have
you.
I missed something out that you would like to?
No, I can listen to you forever. So thank you. Now, do we have any questions from our audience? Please put your hand up. You can click on the hand sign in the bottom segment of the screen. And let's just see, there is in the chat, we have Crystal Steinberg saying, tales am lodged inside as a teacher many years, late crossing the path of what we know within as a part of synchronicity.
Yes.
Thank you, Crystal. And then Gina Diane says, Brenda, you mentioned last class how hearing the story told aloud heightens our appreciation. You have demonstrated this so powerfully. It will be delightful to hear you read the whole book. Thank you for bringing it to life and making it even more memorable. That's true. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Thank you so much. Now, since then, just change screen. Janice put her hand up. Richard, could you please open Janice's audio and video, please?
Open her audio, not video. It's open.
Okay.
Okay, so the audio is open?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you,
Okay.
Janice.
We have a pink rose.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. I've just thoroughly enjoyed both sessions, Brenda, so thank you indeed.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Oops, everything went off on my back on.
Yeah, I'm promoting you to panelist so we can see you. Is that what you'd like, Georgie?
Oh no, whatever is easy and from the tech
Let's
point
just
of
do
view.
audio then. That's what we usually do. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to get my trains on here.
Sorry about that. Okay.
No problem, thank you. Love the storytelling. And having it out loud is so meaningful to me. Even when I'm going through the book, I listen to the audio version of it because it comes alive in a different way. But your telling of the story answered a question I have, a problem that I have. And that is when I've introduced this book in groups or small groups or in class, I found that the book is loved by people who are very intuitive and shunned to a certain extent by people who are sensate. And they said to me, oh, I can only get through the first 2 or 3 pages and I can't go any further. But suddenly I realized, why on the earth do you not think of telling the story in group and demonstrate that to me? And I think that would bring both together. So I really appreciate experiencing this. And then
Yes.
the other, yes.
I'm just going to say what you've said is very important. It's very important to have your own, if you like, repertoire of stories that mean a lot to you. Because I put the dreams in for that reason, because I felt that they fitted their stories. So the fact that people can only do the first 2 or 3 pages is a good sign, because it means that they can't go intellectually fast. And it's a book of intelligence, not a book of intellect. And there's quite a big difference.
Thank you for that. That's a very significant remark for me. Thank you.
So to get people to tell stories in a group is a good idea.
That's a great idea.
Janice, did you have another question?
Yes, I do also have a question. The question is this. Everything about Bluebeard I love what you presented. I've looked at it from the perspective of articles on writing, from empowerment and nursing. And it's really significant. And it's a singular thing that you presented. We do this as an individual. Can you please comment then how that becomes group activity? how can we have that manifested in a group to become even more powerful yet?
Just think of the image of a group. Say you're sitting in a circle and you're all on separate chairs. So each one has an individual chair and an individual personality. But where do your feet rest? They all rest on the same ground, on the same floor. And in that way, the group assembly becomes a metaphor. So when you tell a story in a group, whatever is archetypal becomes the ground of that group. Whatever is personal is the personal viewpoint of that group, of that individual in that group. So if you're leading such a group, you have to have this awareness of the two levels. But the idea of everyone's feet being on the same ground and yet being in an individual chair should give you a metaphor to work with.
That is absolutely beautiful. And it really also illuminates for me a deeper understanding of archetype as well.
I mean, the archetypal world is not really so accessible. There are various words for it. I prefer the word objective psyche to say that that's where the archetypes live. And I like the word subjective psyche to denote the personal experience. So we all of us at this present moment share in the objective psyche. And we all ask different questions because we have a personal psyche. And so there's always a continuous synchronicity going along.
Very beautiful. Thank you, Brenda, very much.
Thank you, Janice, for your contribution and the great questions. Now we have Angie here with us.
Hello.
Hello, Angie.
So, Brenda, I'm really wondering if there are any stories known that aren't created within the patriarchal system, because I feel like even my dreams, they're influenced by the patriarchal system I grew up in, and all of these stories, even in This Woman Who Run with the Wolves, are all created during the patriarchy that we all live in. So is there anything outside that could introduce a new idea or new way of being?
When you speak of the patriarchal aspect, are you speaking of it coming from the cultural aspect or from the unconscious?
Cultural.
Cultural, right. So all of us live in a fairly patriarchal world. I don't think there are any matriarchal societies. There may be a few primal ones somewhere.
So no known stories from women who aren't grown up in and lived in a patriarchal group?
I think that all of us have lived in a patriarchal group because that's how the world is constituted. And that's how we're brought into the world. But it's quite important to widen what the patriarch means, because in our day it's become negative. That is, it's become that the patriarch dominates or tells the woman what to do. And this is true in many cases. But there's also another aspect of the patriarch, which we call the benign patriarch. And this is the patriarch who looks after his family, makes sure his pregnant wife is well cared for, doesn't say that all things are equal and she has to go and work like him. You know, it's this patriarchal aspect is also caring, if we care to look at it in its best light. So you could say that all of us are conditioned by that. So our only way to freedom is to become a woman who is truthful to herself and to deal with the internal patriarch, because the internal patriarch has been internalized from the culture. And this is what gives us trouble, because it's quite easy consciously to say, I'm not going to do that patriarchal thing. But the patriarch within doesn't agree, and then we go to conflict. So when you work with the patriarch within, not the cultural one, they do reflect into each other naturally. you do the work not only for yourself, but for all women.
I've been questioning what is feminine without the cultural thoughts and pictures of what feminine is. Like, what is my basic understanding of my own feminine? And I'm having crazy dreams this past week, just so many dreams. So I've been keeping a list of them, but it's kind of where I'm at. I'm like feeling like, is it the patriarchy in my dreams? Am I still, or is that truly me? And how will I know?
Well, you are the person watching the dream. Your dream ego is watching the dream and recording it. And without your dream ego, you couldn't record the dream. There has to be some consciousness when you are in the dream, which remembers it and writes it down. Now, that is your valuable aspect of the ego consciousness. So naturally, this ego consciousness meets different psychic entities within your psyche. And one of them is going to be, if you're a woman, different types of patriarchal men. So then you do the work internally and you begin a dialogue. You write the dream, you try to think what it is. Could you sort this out within? It's a work of your life, actually. It's to sort out this internal predator, who is often a patriarch, because you hear in Bluebeard that the girls call him Sir and the Master. This is a patriarchal tale. It's not just a nasty man. That's woven into the tale. So the feminine aspect is, of course, aligned to the Great Mother. The patriarch is aligned to the image of God we have in our times. You know, we talk about the patriarch Moses, for instance. He's regarded benignly, but he's called the patriarch. And there are many patriarchs in the Old Testament. So we've carried it all through Judeo-Christianity, the patriarch. What do we do to relate to that outwardly and make sure that our relationship is truthful and not just reactionary? That is, what is the difference between a reaction to the patriarch, which can be very strong in a woman? Certainly, I've known it in me. And then what is the response of the woman, what is our heart says? So this work continues. It's a lifelong work. And through that lifelong work, that feeds into what we call the objective psyche. And gradually, the patriarch dreams begin to diminish. And as you saw in the example, she had the dream of the brown bears. The brown bears is she was partly Russian, and the brown bear is an image of the mother goddess in Russian mythology. So she was directly dreaming of this incredible femininity frolicking in the sea, which of course is the unconscious, and this is the mother too. So your soul is feminine. You are a woman.
Thank you, Brenda.
It's a complex business, isn't it?
It is.
I can't promise an easy ride, but I can say it's interesting.
Well, I think you responded to Angie's question masterfully, Brenda. I'm sure you can say so much more on this subject.
It's a big subject.
It is, isn't it? But it was, brilliant question, brilliant answer. Now we have a question from Jonathan McLeod. He's saying, you mentioned the complement is one of the keys to potential imprisonment of the feminine. Would you map that potentially to perception, as in the passage about, also the less blue his beard?
Well, of course, rationality sets in. And if someone's been nice to you, you say, oh, well, he's not so bad after all. And the beard will fade. Oh, no, I don't really notice it now. That's a form of rationalization. Mm. It's like sometimes there's the habit in a woman especially to trust without proof. They say, oh, trust is good. It's good for a woman to trust. And this is a conditioned reaction. But is it good? It's most definitely not good until you know what's there.
Mm.
So we have all these conditionings. So then you get a person who is, like the dreamer, extremely gifted intuitively, has a quality of the magical about her that you can feel, and yet has this terrible, terrible Bluebeard inside. So then this darkness compliments her on her magicalness, and this keeps her quiet. It takes her energy. And she was a little bit swayed by it until we discussed it, and she said, "Oh, I think it's that bastard again, don't you?" You know, so it came in another form. It shifts its shape.
Yeah, definitely. A quick question before we turn to Gina Diane from GL Horn. The name of the book before Grimm's Tales you mentioned, please.
Oh, Charles Perrault. Shall I spell that for you?
Yes.
Charles
Charles,
is
yeah.
first name. Perrault is P-E-R-R-A-U-L-T.
Thank you.
And they're very mysterious fairy tales, but they're a little bit like many fairy tales. They're about finding the feminine because of the patriarchal influence of culture. So many fairy tales are about finding the woman within, just as Bluebeard is.
Yeah. Super.
They're
Thank
very
you so
good tales.
Thank you, thank you. Gina, over to you. Rick, would you please open her audio?
It's open.
There we
George.
go. Thank you.
Hi, Gina Diane.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm fascinated by the afterword she's written about being medicine. Stories are medicine, and they're a healing property. And I was wondering if you could comment a bit about that, and also about how it's so important to have our own stories. And I'm wondering, I guess, about the borrowing somebody else's story, because Estés has, in a sense, taken all these archetypal stories, she's borrowed them, but she's made them her own.
That's
and I
right,
guess,
yes.
yeah, I guess I'm wondering about that, and if you could talk a little bit more about how do you make other stories your own, or versus telling your own personal stories, and just how effective are both, and just commenting on it as medicine.
Yes, well, it's very difficult to make a story your own if the archetypal ingredient is missing, because this forms the foundation of how flexible you can be with the story. So fairy tales are ideal for this because they are collections of folk tales which have been passed orally from generation to generation and always changed, of course, but the same message is contained in them. So in one story of Bluebeard, like Clarissa, she will say, oh, this blue hank of a beard was indigo colored. That's the bit she's put into the archetypal structure, which is a personal coloring, but doesn't tell any lies, because that's what she got in her heart. She was listening to the story, perhaps. Just imagine she's listening to the story, Bluebeard. She thinks, oh, it can't be Sarah Lewin blue, can it? It must be indigo.
Mm-hmm.
So you begin to associate and use your imagination. So how would I have told that? you know, for me, sound means quite a lot. So when I saw that the door made that sound as it shut, I made that sound up because something had to be said because it was only written. I didn't know what it said, all those dots. So I had to think, oh, it made that sound. But it doesn't alter the basic story, which is about the predator and the structure of the predator in the psyche. And also, I abridged the story a little because I said 3 times the sisters asked. I changed that because it would have taken all night. So I also had to work to a frame, but I didn't want the archetypal message to dissolve. So I just said 3 times the sisters did that, 3 times, and emphasized it by saying it twice so that you wouldn't miss the 3, because there wasn't another 10 minutes to talk about what the 3 sisters each said. So you don't lose the message, but you alter it. Sometimes you have to alter it to fit your audience. And that's another aspect. When I told you about the Sufi tales, of course, there's always a structure, but they will often alter the ending to fit the audience. So in that way, you can't do this unless the story is archetypal. So fairy tales are like that. And then it's your response which colors them. Pinkola Estés' coloring of the indigo beard comes from her response. It doesn't come from the literality of the story, because that means nothing to an archetypal tale. It will assert itself. Does that answer some of it?
It does, yes, that really helped. I had a picture of Malbo in my head of what she looked like. And I was I would put something like that perhaps into a story.
Yes.
Even though my mind was arguing with itself because I saw her as blonde and she was a figure that the Greek matriarchs used. So probably in their mind, she would have had dark hair, but that would kind of bring her to life.
Yeah, that would bring it to life. So if you had some residue in you that thought that she had golden hair, for instance, then you would say, well, the youngest sister had this golden hair and Bluebeard rather liked that. And already you've got something which doesn't distort the story, but gives it a charm that's yours alone.
Oh, wonderful. That helps immensely. Thank you.
So don't be afraid of these stories. If you put the personal responses in, that's fine. You just don't mutilate them and turn Bluebeard into Jesus Christ, you know, it's just not the same thing. As long as Bluebeard stays with what he is, a very nasty predator, and that, you know, you have the 3 times at the end. You see, in a fairy tale, it's always 3 times and then the answer. So 3 times they call, is the brother coming? Is the brother coming? Is the brother coming? And on the 4th stroke, always the thing happens. So if you read fairy tales with 3s in, you'll see the 4th is the result, the answer.
That you just answered another question that I had in my mind, but I don't want to
begin to pick up structures. If I were you, I would read the books on fairy tales by Marie-Louise von France. I think you would love them.
Marie-Louise?
Marie-Louise von, V-O-N, France, F-R-A-N-Z. And she was a specialist in fairy tales. She loved them. And she gave a structural explanation. Wonderful. And this will enrich your feeling about them. It's your feeling that needs to be enriched with fairy tales. You don't need much intellect, but you need a lot of intelligence. And intelligence is your natural response, like when you said you saw the heroine as golden haired or something. That's your intelligence working and giving it an image.
Oh my, that's fascinating. I'd love to hear you talk more about that, but I know we've got other people to ask questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, this is the very last question. It's not easy. This is from Crystal. What potential do you see in women doing this internal work and the impact on the place we find ourselves in the world at this time, given pandemic, climate change, and autocratic politics?
It's a very important question, because sometimes when we do our personal work, we feel it's not important because of all the things coming at us, the climate change, the coronavirus, you name it, it's with us. And we could say the world is in quite a dark place. So the only way to contribute to the world is by our personal work and keep keyed into it. And in this way, the world alters. It doesn't alter from a mass movement. But loads of people like me in France, you in America, Georgian, Hungary, doing their personal work. This is how the world changes, because your personal work goes into the objective psyche, or sometimes it's called the collective unconscious, and there it works on other people. But in our day, we've lost this sense of magic and the fact that the soul travels, and we rationalize everything. So people say climate change, but they very rarely say our beautiful mother is suffering. They don't say that. It's not so acceptable, but it is true. You know, I found a wonderful metaphor the other day of the kidneys of the world. So if your own kidneys go wrong, you become dehydrated. But perhaps there's a bigger way of seeing that the kidneys of the world are dehydrated, and Mother Nature needs water and care and love and medicine. And her medicine is your work. You must do your personal work. This is your big, big, huge blessing of life.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Brenda. Now, please don't go anywhere, our attendees, because I'd like to say first a big thank you to Brenda for sharing this magical book with us. You're a magical storyteller, and I look forward to more presentations of yours, which we are planning already for next year, but it's not confirmed yet, so I can't confirm it. But actually, Rick, may I have the screen, please? Do you mind? So Brenda, a big thank you to you. And if any of our students have any questions, please feel free to email Brenda or myself. And we look forward to seeing you on the 10th of November, Tuesday, at the same time. And we're going to review this wonderful book, The Little Prince. So I hope that you will join us for the last book review of the year, and wishing you well, stay safe. And if you're in the States, go and vote. And look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much, Brenda, again. And thank you, Rick. And warmest greetings to our attendees. All the very best to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.